Welcome to another episode of Tank Talks, your personal think tank for all things startups and venture capital. I'm your host, Matt Cohen, founder and managing partner at Ripple Ventures. On today's show, we welcome Darrell Silver, the co-founder of Unbundled, to discuss his journey as a two-time founder with exits over $100 million and how he is managing his VC and angel investments portfolio in these markets. Darrell shares his journey of building and eventually exiting his second startup Thinkful for $100 million to Chegg and what that experience was like. Next, we dig into why Darrell decided to help create tech companies with underappreciated founders in a venture studio model and the mindset needed for running the studio completely off his own balance sheet. We switch gears and cover why Darrell started investing as an LP in several funds and what he thinks makes a good emerging fund manager. Finally, we ask Darrell how he is navigating the seed and early stage market for manager selection and how he's thinking about investing as an angel moving forward. But before we get started today, as our listeners probably know by now, the team at Ripple is always focused on helping our founders and portfolio companies find the best partners to work with. And when it comes to corporate finance and cash management, there's nobody we recommend more than the team at Jeeves. At Ripple, we manage all our fund expenses and employee credit cards using Jeeves. The team at Jeeves helped me get my team set up with physical and virtual cards in days. I was able to allow my teammates to expense items in multiple currencies, allowing them to pay for anything, anywhere, at any time. We weren't asked for any personal guarantees or to pay any setup or monthly SaaS fees. Not only does Jeeves save us time, but they also give us up to 3% cash back on our purchases, including expenses like Google, Facebook, or AWS every month. The best part is Jeeves puts up the cash and you settle once every 30 days in any currency you want, unlike some other corporate card companies that make you prepay every month. Listeners of Tank Talks can get set up today with a demo of Jeeves and take advantage of our Tank Talks special with a $250 sign-up bonus and skip the waitlist that already has thousands of companies waiting on it by visiting tryjeeves.com/Tank Talks. Use referral code Tank Talks to get set up today. Now let's jump into the tank for this week's episode with Darrell Silver from Unbundled. Thanks for joining us in the tank today, Darrell.
Thank you for having me.
Darrell, I really appreciate you taking the time to share your thoughts on the venture capital markets these days and how you're investing your capital as a limited partner, and also how you started your own venture studio model. But before we get started, I would love it if you could give us a brief background on how you ended up in the tech industry and how you sold your first two startups for over $100 million.
Yeah, absolutely. I started my career in finance at a bit of a rare intersection. I was a software engineer out of college, joined a trading desk that traded fully automated. And so really everyone on the desk programmed the software to do the trading. And I was there for 4 years, 4.5 years. And after like 2.5 years, found myself very attracted to the tech, not at all attracted to the finance. And it only took me 18 months after that to actually leave. At a really fun time at that fund, but didn't know what I was going to do next. Left with no plan and ended up starting a project that turned into a company in 2009. I launched it at TechCrunch 50, if you remember, before it was called TechCrunch Disrupt, after it was called TechCrunch 40. It's like a million years ago. Had Reid Hoffman on stage telling me I didn't understand pricing and I didn't understand anything, but there I was reading off a script. I couldn't even remember the pitch by heart. And then 3 years later, sold that company to a subsidiary of Dell that just made its money back. It made its money back and made like a little bit of money for investors, but it was like a taste. It was like, wow, I love the ambiguity that comes with entrepreneurship. I love the creativity. I love the intersection with business. And oh man, what a great start. And so exactly the opposite of finance, it really turned me on. And then as I was working at the acquirer, met my future co-founder of Thinkful. And then in the end of 2012, we started Thinkful together.
That's amazing. I mean, good for you for after only 2 years in finance, realizing you were more interested in the technology and not actually the finance. I mean, for me, working on the trading desk, it was over a decade before I realized that all of the stuff that we were doing was going to be replaced by algorithms. Full stop. So you had a much more foresight than I did.
We were part of the people making it the algorithms at the time, but it was, it's fun to call it 2 years until realizing I didn't love it. Took another 2 years to actually leave. These things take
as
time.
They call the golden handcuffs are just too good, and the money they do attract you with obviously keeps you there for a little bit longer after college. But you mentioned that you pitched at TechCrunch Disrupt or TechCrunch 50 at the time. What was that experience like, and sort of what happened afterwards? Did you get a lot of attention, a lot of investors? What happened there?
Oh, it was pretty humbling. I mean, this stuff just takes a lot longer for most people and myself than you expect. I remember in hindsight, it was this crazy story. I remember auditioning for TechCrunch 50 with Jason Calacanis, and we were sitting there I was presenting in Sequoia's office, and I had no idea who Sequoia was, but like there I was. There was one partner from Sequoia there, just kind of listening in, and Jason evaluating us, and I had a friend. And the pitch went fine. It was bad, but it was it was a work in progress. And then afterward, the partner from Sequoia says, "Where are you staying when you're in town? I know you're from New York." And I said, "I don't actually have a place to stay." Like, and it was we're looking for a hotel, I guess. And he says, "Well, you could stay in our offices." And I was like, "What do you mean? Like on the floor?" He was like, "Yeah, like, And I was like, I don't know. Like, that's a little like, not quite my thing." And he looks at me and he goes, "It was good enough for the YouTube guys."
That's actually a great test.
It was so deeply humbling. And then he goes, "But don't worry about it. I'll give you the name of one of our portfolio companies, this guy, Brian, at airbedandbreakfast.com. And email them, and they'll find you. Like, just sign up on the service, and they'll find you a place." And I'm like, "What does that mean?" So I did it anyway, and ended up staying for a month in Soma, I think, with someone who I've now come to know for the last decade.
That's a wild story. One, I mean, that's a great test by Sequoia to kind of see how humble actually a starving founder will get. For our first startup, we actually did live in the office and slept on the floor. So I can see where that's coming from. And it's good enough for YouTube guys.
And failing that test, it's good enough for the YouTube guys. It's failing that test. You come out of finance and you think you're hot shit, and it turns out you are shit. And it took me years to kind of re-understand the universe, and I'm much happier for it. But there's a few humbling moments like that.
Oh, that's amazing. Yeah, for sure. And I'm sure Jason was like a Sequoia scout at the time, waiting to find Uber. But that's pretty cool. And you got to obviously chat with Brian Chesky when he was just starting Airbed and Breakfast. I hope you saved that email.
It's a good question. I haven't looked, actually. I mean, it was like, "Can you introduce, what is this thing?"
Yeah, exactly.
He was like, "Just go to this website."
Go sleep on this random person's couch.
Pretty clueless.
Absolutely.
Hopefully less clueless now, but pretty clueless back then.
Hey, you could have been like, customer 50 or something of Airbed and Breakfast. That's a pretty cool title to have on your LinkedIn profile, I guess.
Right, exactly. No, I mean the real lesson of that story is just that I cold emailed to apply to TechCrunch 50, and then it had an interesting enough presentation to make it through whatever criteria. So the real story there is access, and then the rest of it is just getting cut down to size the right amount a few times.
That's amazing. I mean, your first company, obviously it wasn't a huge success, but it still got off the ground and you did make some of your investors some money, which is great. But your second company, Thinkful, you mentioned, is really where you made, your home run happen, which you sold for, I believe, 100 million in 2019 to Chegg after only raising 16 million. So, before you sold Thinkful, I also read that you acquired two companies as well. What was that experience like, building and acquiring and then eventually selling Thinkful to Chegg? And what were some of the best lessons you learned from selling that business that you think other founders should be aware of?
I mean, I love the M&A process. It turns out it's one of the things I learned in that time. Didn't so much love fundraising, but you come to respect it. But I love the M&A process. I mean, acquisitions are forced marriages. The acquiring Block came with a team. Acquiring Odin did not. But we acquired Block, which is a former competitor. We had gotten to know the team for years. And then when the opportunity arose to bring them on, it was a win for Thinkful. It was not as obviously a win for everyone at Block, and that made the transition hard. But it was a lot of work. I was incredibly stressed out. I was basically living in California at a friend's house because their offices are in California. The Thinkful offices are in New York. We did the acquisition. We sort of understood what was going to drive growth, but it was tough. It was tough on the team. It was tough on me. It was tough on the Thinkful team. And then we gained a couple of very senior, great leaders who stayed long term. We gained about a 30% increase in Thinkful revenue that persisted. We learned a huge amount about the market in Thinkful's education world of adults looking to advance their own career. But it was tough. And then the Thinkful acquisition is no different. It was a 6-month journey, talking to multiple bidders, trying to do a fundraise at the same time. Thinkful, we didn't use a banker. And Chegg is pretty detail oriented, like everyone should be when you're acquiring a company. And the diligence was very hard. The deal almost fell apart 3 times, just like it says in all the stories. I mean, that could go on for if you get me in the right frame of mind, I could go on for hours about the Thinkful acquisition with Chegg in 2019. It really was extremely fun and extremely difficult.
Yeah, we'll save that for a future podcast, but I will just poke a little bit on this thread. It's interesting to hear you say, like, a lot of the people that came over, from the acquisition you made yourself, like, that was tough. Synergies are just not really something you just write down on a piece of paper. You got to really work for that post amalgamation, integration with people at the core of it. And that's something people don't really talk about. I mean, just getting across the finish line is one part of the journey, which obviously with you and Chegg, almost fell apart 3 times. And I've experienced, seeing deals fall apart at the 11th hour many times and then somehow, come to be 2-3 months later. But what were some of the things you learned about how to deal with like the acquihires and keeping some of the senior talent and retaining them in order to squeeze out those synergies that you may have almost lost during your first 2 acquisitions?
I mean, I think the main thing is the more clear-headed you are about why you're doing the deal and what the ROI is going to be, the better it's going to go. With Block, we didn't really understand exactly what was going to happen, but we knew it was a good idea. We knew the revenue was going to be good. We knew they were non-overlapping customers. We knew the product was slightly different, and then the rest of it basically fell into place when burn skyrocketed in the summer after the Block acquisition. We knew that not everybody on the team from Block could stay. We knew there were a lot of overlaps, but we didn't, because we just wanted to get the deal done. We didn't really. We were pretty surprised with that, but we shouldn't have been. In hindsight, just recognizing exactly what was going to happen was all pretty predictable, but we didn't see it coming just because of lack of planning. The reason to keep senior team is because number one, they keep the lights on, but also number two, they make the organization better, and it accelerates your hiring. I mean, we bought Block for basically no money, but we took on a lot of liability. What happens after that kind of deal is everybody relooks at their career. They're taking a new job. And so we offered new vesting options for everyone coming over for Block. But that was basically like, okay, am I going to be here for another 4 years? And that was very tough for a lot of people. But Thinkful couldn't afford to do it any different way. Thinkful was succeeding. The team, maybe 60 people at the time, was succeeding. So you didn't have a lot of options to dramatically change people's compensation without pissing off the Thinkful side. So a lot of that stuff was predictable. Block was extremely happy with the deal because it saved a lot of students from losing service. Thinkful's a school, Block's a school. It has a basically 12-month program at the time. And being able to provide continuity of service for the customer and for the students was incredibly important to the team and to the Block investors. And we were able to provide all that. So it worked out great for customers. It worked out great for the team that chose to stay. It worked out great for the team that chose to leave.
It's interesting when I hear you talk about like how all the things you learned being the acquirer or the buyer, it probably really helped you also prepared to when you were the target, knowing, what Chegg was saying versus what they actually were planning on doing. You'd sat on that side of the table before twice, and now you were sitting across from them in a negotiation. And so having that muscle memory of actually being the acquirer and then being the one who's being acquired probably helped you get the deal done with Chegg after almost falling apart 3 times, wouldn't it have?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the deal is really about seeing what's going to happen after this next step. And the 2 lessons I find myself repeating are, number one, when you find someone that's a particularly good fit and is making an offer or talks about making an offer, just you're in the process with a first party, the instinct is to focus on getting them to that next step. But actually, that's entirely wrong. You should focus on, okay, if they say no, what's my best alternative? So I came up with this theory of multiple first choices, which is basically if you've got one option you love and that's your first choice, your job is to find another option that can be your second choice. Then you find another option that can be your third choice. Then you work to make your second choice better than your first and your third better than your second, and you keep them in parallel. And if you can go into every meeting with, gee, you folks are not really my first choice right now, but here's what you need to do in order to, or here's what we need to do in order to get you to the first choice, then you can end up in a very healthy psychology around negotiation, around transparency, around being honest with the acquirer, and that really drives a healthy process. And I find myself giving that feedback to everybody. Your instinct is to focus on the deal in hand. The right thing is to focus on finding another option, a best alternative, as it's called.
I love that. That's a really good negotiation tactic, especially for first-time founders who think if they don't get it the way they envisioned it after their first choice has been taken away from them, then everything blows up, which is not the case. There's always another option to move forward to. Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, multiple first choices. One of the best pieces of advice I got was the dollar price is actually just one term, and the more you go into the details of a medium sized acquisition like Thinkful, it's very, very true. The dollars are just one term. How the equity is split, how a team is treated, who you're going to report to internally, what the close timeline looks like, any number of things. It changes a lot of things, and it matters a lot. The dollar is just one of those terms. So you have a lot of moves to make multiple first choices. They're not going to be the same first choice, not going to look exactly the same, but they're going to be better than each other in different ways.
Yeah, so many founders take the headline number and they think that's all that matters, but there's so much into it: networking capital, escrow, preferred stack, distributions of losses, everything.
Likelihood of close, like all that stuff. Yeah. So I mean, the second piece of advice is you want to be building trust at every stage. If a lot of people just think you can kind of BS your way through M&A, but it basically you can't. I mean, it's a long process. If you can BS your way through, then you probably don't want to work there, or they shouldn't close, and you can't. So you have to be building trust in every conversation. And so one of the things I love to do is before there's any commitment, I remember sitting with the CEO of one company and saying, listen, you're doing a great job. Your team's asking all the right questions, but we know our business better than you. Here are the things you've not asked about yet that inevitably you're going to discover after you commit to doing the deal. In diligence, you're inevitably going to talk about these things. You're going to freak out. And I'm going to tell you exactly what they are. They're no big deal, but you haven't made any commitments. And if it freaks you out, then feel free to walk away. And that builds a huge amount of trust. And it's true. It's honest. Like you're not going to, the deals fall apart on the 1 yard line because issues you hoped would not surface are inevitably going to surface, and they always surface, and they only really matter until the deal's about to close when everyone's going through their last checklists. So you have to be honest. You have to be upfront. You have to think what's going to happen after the next step.
Yeah, I mean that's ballsy, and it's extremely confident in your ability to basically know that you may bust the deal wide open. But you have to realize that you're just kicking the can down the road if you don't bring it up in the beginning. And you also just waste a lot of time and money, which is a great lesson. So thank you for sharing that. After leaving your role at Chegg in January 2021, you went on to launch 503 Corp to help create tech companies with underappreciated founders in a venture studio model. So can you explain why you wanted to do this and how you set up yourself as a venture studio?
Yeah, and 503 follows this pattern of just bias to action. So it's an unnamed organization. We actually are I'm guessing by the time this podcast comes out, it'll be called Unbundled Studio. But basically, Unbundle started because the former head of people and recruiting at Thinkful, after the deal went through, spent a year looking for what he wanted to do next. And every quarter I would talk to him, and every quarter he would say, I talked to this company, I love them from the outside, and then they were just going to be a disaster to work for. They didn't have this policy, they didn't work on this, they didn't value this, they didn't value that. They need to do all these things, and even if I told them when I worked there, they wouldn't listen to me. It's like, there's only so many times you can hear someone tell you that. And eventually I said, just why don't you do this yourself? Just start a company that solves this problem for others. Make them the place that you would want to work. And he did that. I reached out to my network. I was advising maybe at that time 12 companies, now 18, around in a variety of ways, mostly ed tech. And I asked if they would want recruiting and HR help, and they were like, absolutely. I absolutely have trouble hiring, and I don't know what policies to put in place, and I don't understand. I don't want to work on HR. It's a cost center. So Ben was able to build this business called Union. I just really learned that I enjoyed working with him and supporting him. I was able to backstop financially his risk. So he was in a place in his career where he has experience. It would be crazy to take a huge risk and starting with zero and trying to get to one. But if you limit the risk a little bit for him, then he can really thrive and grow into his own opportunity, grow own ability. So I love doing that with him. I just learned I really enjoy supporting people who are just before they think they're ready. And if you can find them, then it's an incredible fit. So that started Union. 6 or 9 months into Union, I started thinking, this idea that you should be getting the best-in-class support for HR, you should be not thinking about it yourself as a founder or a CEO, even up to like 500 people. We had all these clients up and down the size. I wonder if it applies to other areas. Does it apply to finance? Does it apply to revenue operations? Does it apply to accounts receivable? Like, are there other cost centers that you shouldn't be owning, that you should be better off spinning up and not thinking about it ever again and saving money? And the answer, looked like yes. And so we started this thing, 503, now Unbundle, to launch companies, peers of Union, to help companies get these topics they don't want to think about, but they need to do off their brains and onto some expert that wants to run that business. So it's interesting. The studio the businesses are in some sense incredibly boring by design. They're the things that you don't want to think about as a leader, but that get hoisted over to you, the things that cost a lot of money, but that you don't want to invest in. And so we just do a better job at it because what is a cost center to you is a profit center to us and to this portfolio companies. And it's early days, but I'm liking what we're seeing, and the companies are a blast to work with, especially when you have a founder like Ben focused on it.
So is the venture studio a little bit different than like a traditional venture studio where you incubate an idea from scratch and provide some equity, which goes towards, initial resources of the business, maybe some talent, maybe some infrastructure, and, design and MVP building? Or are people coming to you with a kind of MVP product and you're giving them the add-on cost centers, like you mentioned, like recruiting, structure, strategy, things like that?
Oh, it's definitely the former. We have a roadmap of ideas that we're validating. We'll bring on EIRs, entrepreneur in residence, who are people that are ready to found their next thing, but it's financially ridiculous to go to zero salary for a year because they have experience. It's kind of this catch-22 of having any experience. And so we're incubating those ideas that are replacing cost centers at all companies. And then we build the BD pipeline. We find initial customers. We build initial product. It's its own C corp. Each one that gets launched, and like you say, it's a split cap table.
Got it. Okay, makes sense. So it's a true venture studio model. Now, what is the investment thesis and strategy, and how are you recruiting founders to come and work with you on cool shit?
I mean, the investment thesis is it's crazy that every company reinvents things that are not their cost center. You should not be burdened with reinventing a recruiting machine. You should not be burdened with reinventing every vacation and parental leave policy and bereavement policy and staying up to date with performance reviews. And you should not be burdened with all the things that if you ask a founder, they say, I really just don't want to think about this. It doesn't make, as Jeff Bezos said, don't do it if it doesn't make your beer taste better. Meaning if you're building something, you want to focus on what makes you innovative and different. You don't want to focus on the stuff that is the same across you and your competitors. So we're building those things that make you the same. We think you should save money, save time, save brain space, make it easier to scale, make it lower risk by, instead of hiring team, hire us. The best example of this is Pilot. Pilot provides bookkeeping as a service. It's a mix of software. It sits on top of QuickBooks. They provide the operations, and you just never have to think about bookkeeping. And it's a powerful model when it works. And the thesis is that it's crazy to start a company that tries to generate its own power in order to run its computers. And that's also the case with HR. It's also the case with revenue operations. It's also the case with every cost center. And so we're building those centralized services.
That makes sense. I mean, that's what we did with our first incubator, The Tank, where we had fractional CFOs, fractional, PR and marketing people, Salesforce implementation strategy people, things like that, CEO coaches. So are you templatizing a lot of this? Are you bringing in experts on your balance sheet and then offering them as value add services to the companies that you're incubating as well?
Well, those are the companies we're incubating. So what I like doing is you find, let's say, an FP&A person and that is yearning to be their boss, meaning to be the person they currently work for, meaning the founder of that business. And they just have their own expenses, but they have years of experience and they have that chip on their shoulder around starting something. You put them in a position where they can build their own startup around how FP&A should function across all companies, and they thrive, just like Ben did with Union. He's now got companies that are anywhere from 10 people to 1,000 people that are effectively bringing their HR needs to him instead of hiring full-time. And he provides the full stack solution. His team provides the full solution for them.
Got it. That's the comparison to Pilot that you're making. Makes sense. Now, are you running this studio completely off your own balance sheet, or have you brought in outside capital?
Yeah, at the moment where I'm running it entirely off my own balance sheet, they are cash generating businesses, so it's not a huge financial commitment on a sort of month to month basis. But none of them. I think the right time to raise money for this kind of business is when you see a path to monopoly, and we're not there yet. They start off looking like services businesses, which is about the furthest you can possibly get from a VC investment, and then you discover the internal efficiencies in software to build, the external products to sell as SaaS, and all of a sudden it starts to look more and more like a SaaS business or like a monopoly, and that's a good time to raise money. So unions closer, but no, it would be irresponsible to say that to give away equity. One, because it would limit our upside in that owning 100% of a thing generates more income if it turns out to be a cash flow business. But two, owning, if you're a VC and you own 5 or 10% of a thing and it turns out to be cash flow, like it doesn't move your needle at all, you want to know that it can be you want to know that it has a shot at a monopoly. So that's the right time for us to raise money.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's a complete opposite of like a Y Combinator or Techstars. You're actually looking at capital efficient businesses that are being started by, corporate expats who come from the legal, accounting, finance professions. They want to start their own services business, but it's too risky for them to do it all on their own dime. So they take funding from your venture studio model. They de-risk it there, but they can still build their own franchise and their own sort of business as their own boss. But there's obviously the support and backing where you get the upside in that, pretty successful, I'm sure, capital efficient business that doesn't need a lot of capital to get going, which is a different model than what we're seeing in the venture model.
Yeah, exactly. And it's kind of remarkable after the last decade of venture models being the primary way, you run into this. I consistently run into tools that have no idea how to deal with a cash generating profitable business. Like we have a Silicon Valley bank account and it has a little graph every time you open the app of your runway. It says runway. And so when you're profitable, it says runway NA. Like the use case, the percentage of users with, you think about the product manager about thinking like, well, that's an edge case, cash on cash growth every month for the last 90 days is like we don't have to worry about that. Just ship it, like it's sort of amazing to discover how in some sense twisted up the system has gotten over the last 10 or 15 years.
Yeah, it's a great euphemism for how we've twisted the thinking of how businesses should be built. It's like, what's your runway? It's like, well, it's indefinite because we're profitable. No, but what's your runway? You're like, no, we don't have a runway problem.
Right, exactly. I'm not criticizing venture capital, but you got to pick your right tools. And one of the things you gain with experience is which tools to take off the shelf at the right time. So it's a tool like anything else.
Absolutely. So let's switch gears though and talk about your limited partner experience, because you do invest in venture capital funds. You have spread some of the capital you have on your balance sheet beyond just your venture studio model, and you've been an LP in several funds. So can you tell us about how you got started and what was your initial strategy when making your first few LP commitments?
Yeah, the way I got started is twofold. One, there's some level you should put responsible, if you're sort of responsible allocating your money, is to put small percent, kind of maybe whatever, pick a number, 10% into a much higher risk endeavor, especially if you don't need access to that capital for a long time, like a decade. So that was the first sort of high level approach. And then the other one was, I really enjoy the advising investing that working with the founder when you can actually make an impact on the business is fulfilling. Plus it's strikes me as good capital allocation if I can provide excess value beyond just the dollars. So I looked for LPs and investments where industries I know, and places where I know the founder or the investor or the GP will listen to me or put me in a place where I can add real value to the portfolio.
So you weren't looking to diversify exposure to industries you don't have any background in or access to, but really try to double down on what you knew best, but in a different sort of medium of accessing some of that next generation of ed tech founders or startups.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I haven't really done the work, but it's obviously the case that access to deals determines a huge amount of success in VC land. And if I'm seeing a deal for a lithium battery maker, which is something I recently saw flow by, what are the chances that I'm seeing one of the top 3 companies in lithium battery makers? Like, I've never had a history in energy or mining or manufacturing of physical things. Like, what are the chances that the group I'm in or the person that reaches out to me is like actually one of the top ones? It seems pretty low because the experts should have earlier, better access and better filtering. They're front running me. So it seems foolish to go outside of an industry, outside of the industries, if you're in a competitive market for fundraising. And then it seems foolish for another reason, which is how am I supposed to evaluate the quality of a lithium battery maker? It's crazy. No, I stick with what I know, which is the last decade of ed tech and maybe the next decade, and some of the SaaS work that that I've seen over the last 15 years, and then layer on that all the same risks of all VC, and hopefully it comes out ahead.
I love that. I love the fact that you know what you know and you say no to what you don't know, and also the fact that you need to see dozens, if not hundreds, of similar companies to know which horse to bet on. And we tell our team that all the time. Now, sometimes people say, well, so and so unicorn was passed over by 100 VC funds, and the 101st one made the decision to bet on them, kind of like a GitLab, and it ends up becoming a $15 billion company. Well, I know those are the outliers, but there's also 99% of the ones that actually were passed on for a reason. And the ones who ended up being the 101st investor had their shirts ripped off. So I don't think that's a really good way of thinking.
Insert image of airplane coming back after World War II to the battleship, right? If there's a survivor bias problem in that common wisdom.
Yeah, absolutely. But talk about your due diligence process. Obviously, you've got a background in ed tech, so you look at things all the time in this space. What does your typical due diligence process look like for making capital commitments into companies or into LPs funds?
Is the pitch simple? Is it inevitable? Is the product inevitable? And then, do the founders really understand what it takes to be successful, and do they have it either by track record or by what I think it was Andreessen that first called the mind map of the sector, and are they in it for the long term? And those apply to both the companies and the funds. But at core, there's a lot of people that work in tech for the payday, and there's a lot of people that work in education for the mission, and you have to a little bit blend the two in order to understand the determination and perseverance that's going to be required over the decade it'll take to build something successful. Thinkful was 7 years to the day from founding to exit, meaning the deal closed exactly on the 7-year anniversary, which is sort of shocking. And then I worked there for another year and a little bit, and then I still work in a lot of ways with a lot of the folks that we hired along the way. This is a decade-long overnight success, right? And you have to be willing to put in at least that much time. Thinkful was arguably fast. You have to be willing to put in at least that much time. So you can't just be driven by mission because you won't make good business decisions. You can't just be driven by payday because you won't have the longevity it takes. You have to have a nice mix of the two.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I love about this industry and this job is that it takes so long to actually see the returns that it weeds out a lot of the flippers and a lot of the people that are kind of tourists into the industry.
Not when you're investing at the angel stage, though. When you're investing at the angel stage, they're not yet weeded out.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. But it's just like this podcast, like 99% of people fail to get to their first 5 or 10 podcasts. And so if you kind of play that long game, you end up outlasting, but you have to have the determination to make it through that, which is the same thing with venture investing. And, 7 years from beginning to exit, it's pretty fast. I mean, for an average company, for sure. Our first company was 5.5 years, at half the value of your exit, but still, that was extremely fast. And people thought that was like an eternity, which I had to explain to them was actually not. But you as an LP, what do you think makes a good fund manager, and what makes them a good general partner, and what makes them a good partner back to you as an LP?
Yeah, it's the same as having a really good board member. The network, the ability to say, meaning specifically like, oh, you're having this challenge, I can reach out to so-and-so that saw that challenge 3 years ago and put you guys in touch. The ability to give you a market survey and a market forecast. Here's what we're seeing across our other portfolio companies. Here's what the next stage funding advising environment looks like. Here's the metrics you need to have in order to qualify at that next stage based on today's market. That survey is quite easy to say and quite hard to build. So a good board member, a good investor does that. And then of course they can find the money either directly from their fund or put their credibility on the line when you're fundraising yourself or going through M&A. It's sort of funny actually. Floodgate led our Series Seed, and Mirko, who was also one of the seed investors in Lyft and like a bunch of other things. She sat on our board from 2014 through to exit, and Floodgate was a seed investor or early investor in Chegg. And so just down the road, Chegg headquarters, and we met the Chegg team years before that acquisition started because of Anne and because of Mike Maples. And years later, when the acquisition was in discussion, it was Anne who, she doesn't say much, but when she does, it's incredibly powerful. She was saying, let me talk to the Chegg team and understand where their head is at to make sure this deal is real. Let me get everyone thinking about what we're really after here instead of the emotion of the moment. And then these small in time contributions, but massive impact were hallmarks of just a great board member. And then Amit Patel at Owl, incredible network from Owl Ventures, incredible network from seed to massive exits in edtech, and they know everybody, and Amit knows everybody, and everyone respects them. So having the ability for him to come up with ideas on who to learn from was incredibly powerful. So it's the same thing. A good GP and a good fund manager is going to be able to understand the market, put you in touch with the right network, and solve money problems for you.
Now, have you gone around and gone back to those VCs that invested in Thinkful and become an LP in their future funds?
In the case of Owl, yeah, I'm an advisor to and another company, a board member of Owl Investments, and sit on a board with Amit at Fiveable as an investor as well in a couple of Owl funds. Actually, it goes to show Owl's commitment to. I mean, it sounds like an ad for them, so I guess.
No. I mean, I love it when future founders or founders who have successful exits become LPs in our funds. It's an absolute amazing ripple effect to see that happen.
Yeah, they build the network. I remember one time I was at the investor day for Owl when it was still as Thinkful CEO, and I met someone from met someone from one of their current other LPs, and he said, "Yeah, our strategy, we're probably going to launch our own fund in a couple years." And so I asked Amit later, why is it that you're letting these future competitors in to the Owl funds? They get to learn everything, and you're giving away the whole store. And Amit says, it's not about the intellectual property and the know-how. It's about we're making the pie bigger, and that benefits us, and that benefits everybody. So it was that long view that he had, that Owl's always had, that really is one of the huge hallmarks of a great investor.
Yeah, I mean, we let a lot of GPs invest in our funds at LPs because it builds out the network, and it also allows them to look at potentially leading, follow-on Series A or Series B rounds in our portfolio companies like Craft Ventures or Leaf Fixold Edition and things like that. So, we're all about that as well at Ripple. Now, I got to ask, were there any good lessons you learned from your time working with Mike Maples at Floodgate?
Oh, I mean, Mike is how does he get described as a sort of crazy uncle? But he's approximately the most incredible marketer. Well, he's certainly the most incredible marketer I've ever met. He's approximately one of the most incredible marketers ever. When he has a new podcast out actually, which is really fun to listen to because he always asks these incredibly fundamental questions. What would, if you want to sort of parody, you could make like a GPT-3 of Mike Maples, or a Mike Maples 3, let's call it, where it was like, what if in the future there was no farming? What would you do as a source of food if in the future the grocery store was a fully online experience? What would happen if buildings stopped having roofs? And he asks these questions that are sort of like, when you think of them very quickly, they're nonsensical, but when you actually think of them deeply, they raise these incredibly interesting and creative ideas. And he has a way of doing that in every context. My examples are pretty good GPT-3 knockoffs because they're sort of crappy, but he does it really, really well. And it's impressive how much he understands how to communicate with someone who's never heard of your product. And that's what I mean by just a brilliant marketer.
Yeah, he is amazing. I got to check out that podcast. I didn't know he had one of those out, so I'll check it out. Now, what kind of mistakes are you seeing other emerging managers do? Obviously, you meet with a bunch of them, looking to have you as an LP that, you should, make sure other emerging managers are aware of. What red flags that, people just should not do when they are pitching you as a potential LP?
Yeah, I mean, maybe it's just me, but I think when someone comes across thinking they're the first to invent something in the financial sector, it comes across as greedy rather than wise. So you got to know the history and know how long success takes. The fees are not going to be short. If you find yourself explaining your fee structure instead of your insight, then you're probably doing it wrong. The amazing thing about being in the money moving business is that people are pretty interchangeable. It's sort of like the essence. Capital allocation is the essence of capitalism. The people allocation is too. It's a lucrative business if you're successful. It's easy to go wrong, and if you're not thinking long term, if you don't know what's been done before, which is kind of everything, then it's hard to have an insight that's durable for the decade you need just to have a first fund succeed.
Yeah, absolutely. You got to play the long game, and you got to know that this isn't about the 2 and 20 or just the two. It's really all about the 20. As I've told my team many times, given that I haven't taken a salary from the fees in 3 years. So I think that's important for a lot of first time fund managers to be aware of. How are you focusing on growing as an LP, and how do you add value to the GPs that you invest in?
I mean, understanding their market better is the best way. It's a pretty quiet role. You're not all that active most of the time. But if I can bring a deal, that's exceptional. If I learn something about the market and then share it, that's exceptional. We're in the information moving business in a lot of ways, because when you hear about a deal and the headline, it's not really what's going on behind the scenes. And so, what does it really tell you about your other portfolio companies? That's these things are you have to really understand each company and each dynamic to keep up to date. And so the more I can help bring that context, the better. It's been really educational how to be a good independent board member, where it took me about a year to figure out what the job was. But it's basically you've got the CEO who needs to learn how to listen to capital to the investor that's on their board, and the investor has their needs, the company has its needs. Independent board members there to make sure kind of everyone's listening to each other. And I'm finding that role to be particularly effective. I have the lowest equity stake by a long shot on the Fiveable team, on the Fiveable board anyway, and it's important to help everybody make sure they're hearing the wisdom that's coming across in both directions.
Yeah, independent board members, I think, are the most vital board members for a startup to have, but they're the hardest to find. You just said it yourself. You're truly independent. You don't have a lot of equity in the game. You're kind of sitting on both sides of the table between the investors and the operators, but they're really hard to find. Why is that?
Well, it's funny. Advisors and independent board members. I had John Danner told me this about a year ago that it's basically philanthropic. Your dollars per hour, even if the company has a huge success, are pretty low. You're kind of on call all the time. The company doesn't, the founders, they don't really listen to you. Probably the biggest piece of advice that I give is to not raise money. And I have like an approximately 0% success rate for having the company listen to me on that. And I'm still not clear why, but it can get old. Once you add up all those factors. Yeah, the lesson I learned from Anne was, as I mentioned, was if you say one incredibly impactful thing a year, one incredible impactful thing every 2 years, then you can dramatically change the course of the company many times. She does that better than anyone, and it combines well with the percentage that the founder will listen to you.
Yeah, definitely. Well, we may be calling you on you as an independent board member for some of our ed tech companies in the future. But talking about the current markets right now, and how you're navigating the seed and early stage markets, how are you thinking about manager selection, and what suggestions or advice would you have for new investors or LPs looking to get into the venture capital asset class in order to mitigate risk and manage their upside downside in today's market?
I guess if you're a new investor, make sure your goals are clear on a year by year basis, because you'll see deals every week, every day, multiple times a day, but you won't get feedback about your existing deals for many, many years. And so, if you're lucky, they all got a business. It happens faster, and so you have to have an objective function that you can in a shorter term. So, are the deals getting stronger? Are you getting good communication from the founders? Are you learning? Are you seeing other deals that you should have had access to that get announced after the fact? And then, of course, the standard logic is also true. Don't invest anything you can't lose, especially unless you're going to do it professionally.
So, are you looking at your LP commitments as a sort of like a scout check or an anchor into a fund for you to do larger checks on breakout winners for the direct side, like the co-investment side? Is that sort of your strategy as an LP?
I think my strategy as an LP is access. I want if it's access to a future round for a portfolio company, that's great. If it's access to the next company that I meet because I was an investor in the fund that invested in something else, then that's also great. But in this world, you have to have access to the fund. You have to have access to the companies that dictates a huge amount of your opportunity. And so I tend to want to measure the increased access I'm getting.
Yeah, access, access, access. That's for sure what I thought about when I was starting my fund and also as an angel investor, and even being an LP myself in half a dozen other funds. It's truly about access and building out that network. which is obviously a long-term, goal, but it is something you need to start doing immediately. What is the best career advice you've ever received from another LP in the space when you were just thinking about becoming an LP yourself?
Definitely think long term about what you're in for. If you're like, gee, I'll invest in this fund and then I'll use the money to buy a house in 3 years, you're definitely going to fail. It's just you've locked up the capital and that's it. This is sort of done. If you feel FOMO, it's probably coming from you're probably not in a great place to invest. These things happen day to day, but the feedback, again, like I said, the feedback takes a decade. Again, access. If you don't have a reason that the market should care about your dollars more than others, then you're probably wasting your time and you're going to get taken advantage of.
Yeah, absolutely. Are there any emerging managers that you've backed recently that you want to give a shout out to that you're excited about what they're building?
Yeah, but I just got a message from one of them the other day that they have a big announcement coming, so I'm not allowed to say anything.
Okay, fair enough. We'll have to add that to the show notes after it becomes public. Now, before we jump into our fast favorites, I saw that you were building a workshop with your father, which first off, that's fucking awesome because I've always dreamed about having a wood shop, and I love watching wood making videos on TikTok and people taking scraps of wood and turning them into something beautiful. So I got to ask, what was the inspiration behind this and what cool shit have you been making?
I think, it's funny. I spent from college, first year of college through to like the end of my 30s, I spent working full time. And this was the first time when I was not. And that's a big change. And I've learned this thing that turns out to be like really universal, which is that people in software have a yearning to do something in the physical world. And a lot of them, it's shocking the number of people that see I do any kind of woodworking now, and they say, "Oh my God, I watch so many YouTube videos on woodworking, and I love it, and I want to do that later in life, and I'm so excited to do that." It's like everyone has the experience you've been having, and so it's exactly the same motivation. It's great to build something physical after having built something in software for 20 years, 30 years.
It's just nice to touch something and feel it and just see it kind of come to life, right?
It's a very different thing than in software. You can build, and if you don't like it, you just rip it out and start over, or you scaffold and then get to your goal and then come back around and build the version 2 on top. Or instead, in wood, or I'm sure it's the same in metal, you have to plan the steps far in advance, and the more planning you do, the better off it becomes. In software, there's a diminishing returns quite quickly, so it's a fun change. The other lesson that's been amazing to learn is it is faster to conceive of an idea, draw it, measure it, plan it, build it, stain it, move it, than it is to order something and have it delivered through any number of stores. You go to it's shocking. It's the phenomena of supply chain and shipping costs and in furniture is on par with the dishwasher shortage and car shortage. It's like shocking. And so it's been really fun to outperform the global supply chain with my own 2 hands.
That is awesome. What's the coolest thing you've built, or what are you most proud of?
Well, the coolest thing, that's a great question. The coolest thing I built was definitely this thing my husband hated, which is a TV stand. So we have a TV that sits in front of a window, and I wanted the TV to not block the window. So I built naturally a box that the TV would hide in, and you press a button and it comes up. The box lifts the TV. And it worked great. Everyone that came over loved it. I had the electrician. We did a renovation. I had the electrician was in the house, and he saw a demo, and he was like videoing it. He was like, "This is the most amazing thing." I built the whole thing. It was awesome. My husband hated it. It makes noise when it turns on, and the top goes up and down. He doesn't like furniture that moves, which is fine. And but I was really happy with it. And then the thing I'm most proud of is he came back from a long business trip, and I surprised him because I swapped out the moving box for a low TV stand that does block the window just a little bit, but also looks lovely and doesn't move. And the TV is not as ugly as I feared. And so I'm most proud of this marriage therapy furniture that I built over this past summer.
That's amazing. I just buy a bunch of stuff and then store it in the house. My wife hates it. So I got to start actually building my own things. Maybe that'll give me a little bit more clout. One of the things we love to watch, which I'm sure you've seen on Netflix, is Blown Away. Watching the glass blowing that these people make online in these furnaces at like 1600 degrees Fahrenheit is just mind blowing. So if you haven't seen that show with your husband, you got to check that one out on Netflix.
I have. It's really fun. That show is the show is really fun.
Well, before we jump, we always ask our guests for their fast favorites. So first off, your favorite podcast.
This is my favorite podcast. My favorite new podcast is definitely, I think Mike Maples is up there. We'll have
What's
to
it
put
called?
the name in the show. I've just forgotten. If you look up Mike Maples Jr.
I'm
on
sure we'll
any,
find it.
on the app, you'll find it. But I've never forgotten the name. He only has a handful of episodes, but he knows everybody. He's obviously going to be interviewing everybody. He doesn't just interview the sort of celebrity folks. He interviews people that actually do the work and asks them really fun questions. So that's my new favorite podcast.
Awesome. Next, your favorite newsletter or blog?
Matt Levine is absolutely unparalleled, and I don't know how he does it. I think it's just him. It gets a little. I wish he did a little less crypto and like was a little shorter when he talked about Twitter, Elon. But other than that, which you can easily spot, it's a shockingly high quality newsletter.
It's like every article is like a large Vanity Fair essay, but they are amazing. Favorite tech gadget?
Probably the Apple Watch is my favorite tech gadget. It sort of transformed my life little by little, and I'm healthier as a result, and that's a shocking achievement for.
What's your favorite feature on it?
The most unexpected feature is probably the sleep tracking is like really good, but my most used feature is definitely exercise monitoring. So I injured my shoulder this past winter, and tracking when and for how long I'm doing the physical therapy and the occupational therapy and the strength training for it has just been very effective at motivating and monitoring progress.
Yeah, I love mine, but my favorite feature is the pinging of where your phone is in the house. By far the best one. Favorite new trend?
Yeah, that's a great one. That's a great feature. New trend. I think it's a sort of this is like completely uncreative, but it does seem like AI is moving into our lives in a way that is vastly more helpful than the last 5 years, and the next 5 is going to be incredibly fun as a result. So, last 5 years is Google Home, which is great, but it's not really in our lives. It's more just like there instead of connecting a wire to your speaker. Being able to speak conversationally, generate basically search results or the image you're looking for or the design you're looking for. Today it takes hours to build a design for a piece of furniture and get all the measurements correct, but being able to sketch it in broad strokes and then come out with a fully parameterized model is going to be a wild change in creativity. And whenever tech can influence creativity like that, it's very powerful. And that trend feels only a couple years away. I had a friend bring over a Shaper, which is a router built by a startup called, I think, Shaper Tools, and it was just acquired by Festool. And this router, not a computer router. A router is like a sort of a blade on the end of a spinning whatever thing, and it puts a groove or puts an edge of a certain shape on the side of your piece of wood. This router is AI assisted, and it will give you a perfect cut, correcting along the way for the motions your hand moves versus the direction you want it to go. So you say you want to make a circle that's 18 inches in diameter. If you try to do it by hand, it'll be full of imperfections because your hand doesn't move perfectly. This router will automatically know where that circle needs to be and adjust for your incorrect hand motions. The precision involved in doing that is, if you just think about it, very high, and it does it perfectly and flawlessly. And that kind of integration of AI and image recognition is just around the corner for a lot of different areas. So I'm pretty excited about that.
Yeah, conversational AI, conversational design. Our investment in VoiceFlow was made, only 3 years ago, but the industry has changed dramatically, and seeing the use cases coming out of it are just mind blowing. So, with you on that one. Favorite book?
Hitchhiker's Guide, which is really 4 books, trilogy in 4 parts. But Hitchhiker's Guide is it might be the only book I ever need to read again. I might just read it over and over. It's incredibly funny and incredibly educational, and it tells you a lot about the universe.
Absolutely, especially I'm sure in your year off you had or so building the woodworking shop. It's the perfect book trilogy to have around you. And your favorite business book you have?
Favorite business book is definitely the McDonald's book, Grinding It Out by Ray Kroc. Is really underappreciated. The movie was good, fun. The book is actually quite educational about the grit and determination and long-term view you have to have in order to you could say start or found, but it was McDonald's, so let's say grow and build a business. And I mean, Kroc started working. He sort of took over McDonald's like in his late 40s, early 50s, and he writes the book like 10 or 15, 20 years later, and he's selling like mad. He's an unbelievable vigorous salesperson, and it gives you this perspective on what it takes to actually build something big, and he's got it, and it's a pretty underappreciated.
Now, is that the movie with Michael Keaton? That one?
I think that's the one. Yeah, he's selling like ice cream mixers out of the back of his Cadillac, driving around California. Yeah, the book has more. The book is written by him. It gives him less credibility as a storyteller, but it gives him more realism as a salesperson, because he's pitching you kind of as you're reading it. He's settling scores in the pages. It's a lot richer as a business book if you read it than the movie was, which was pretty entertaining.
Fantastic. And last but not least, your favorite life lesson.
How lucky I think I've been, just in terms of the odds were kind of stacked in my favor my whole life. It's easy to look at how, like, I've worked a lot of years. I've worked done things that took a long time, and I put a lot of effort in, and there was a reward at the end of it. But actually, it was the being born into a place where my parents could buy a computer at a young age, and I could learn software on my own. It was being able to go to schools where I was surrounded by people that were also taking big risks and could build precociousness. And when you discover how rare that opportunity is, it makes you want to spend the rest of your life opening that opportunity for more people.
Yeah. Stay humble and pay it forward, essentially, is what you're saying, which is amazing lessons and advice to live by. So thank you so much for joining us in the tank today with Darrell Silver, co-founder of Unbundled.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Tank Talks. To learn more about this episode, be sure to go to Apple Podcast or Spotify to find more detailed notes on this episode, or to check out previous episodes. Also, if you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a review and a rating, as it helps us out a lot. And hit that subscribe button so you can get notified when new episodes come out. Finally, make sure to give me a follow on Twitter @MattyBCohen or @Tank Talk Podcast to stay up to date on new episodes or to be a guest on our show. Till next time,